So thanks again, Stephen. Again, like Steve just mentioned, I would like to remind everyone that we can put questions in the chat portion of the Zoom meeting. I'm jotting them down as we go so that we can ask both of our speakers at the end of the presentation. So let me please introduce the second speaker. Ivana Solkowska is a second-year computer science PhD student at Ryerson University. Ivana's interests are in the automation of knowledge dissemination and knowledge extraction. Under the supervision of Professor Andrew Muransky, Ivana is developing techniques for semantic code analysis using artificial intelligence, specifically graph neural networks. Ivana is a co-founder of OpenSale, a distributed platform of licensed content dissemination. With over 10 years of experience, Ivana has designed products and services in medical imaging, medical informatics, and enterprise knowledge management systems. Ivana holds a honors BSc double major in computer science and mathematics from York University and an MSc data science and analytics from Ryerson University. Her mission is to improve the support of open education community and increase the adoption of open education resources in institutions around the world. So please, without further delay, Ivana, take it away.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to present the challenges and opportunities associated with open education resources, OER, and how Corda, a blockchain technology, can address many of them. I'm Ivana Sokalska, PhD computer science student at Ryerson. My supervisor is Dr. Andrew Miransky, and I'm part of his software engineering lab. The lab's focus is on mitigating risks in software engineering, operations, and maintenance. Dr. Andrew Miransky holds numerous patents and IP in this area. The specific task I'm working on is the automation of bug localization using neural networks and sparse graph data. In essence, I'm building a recommendation engine to identify relevant software code given a bug report. My business partner is Sean Burney. Sean was part of a collaborative book project which was published in 2008 by BC Campus and Commonwealth of Learning. This chapter was a roadmap for building collaborative technologies to support communities of practice. Now we are building a distributed supply chain for open education, a transactional engine named OpenSale Education. The presentation is divided into 4 parts. The first part is the business motivation. The second part is an overview of Corda Blockchain. The third part is business value. And finally, the fourth part is the technical feasibility. Now we're ready to dive in. To motivate the business problem, we will first take a look at the current state of the ecosystem and its data ownership model. Then from the perspective of 3 types of users, we will list the challenges. Note that in this presentation, I will use the term content and resource and OER interchangeably. Open education resources, OER, can be created by individuals, but most often by large institutions. This content is then distributed to other institutions via proprietary platforms managed by the institution itself or by private business. The interesting part happens after the content has been published. Ideally, other institutions which would like to lower the cost of education for their students go out and find these resources across the different platforms. In reality, it is not easy for higher education faculty to do so. Aside from some few standard textbooks, most courses are unique. Finding the right open resource can be challenging. Often faculty turn to commercially curated content, prepackaged resources, or receive grants to create their own open education resources. Data privacy and data ownership are 2 different things. Open or free content generates highly valuable usage data. Who owns this usage data and who should? Many institutions that create OER have their own platforms. However, individual content creators or smaller organizations need to find external platform to host their content. Overall, findability of the content is optimized when it's advertised on many different platforms. In the current model, content creators passively participate in a distribution chain, perhaps because they don't have their own platform, but also because they don't own their usage data. At the moment, no platform provides ability to negotiate content usage. Students need affordable content that is accessible and current. Ideally, the student has choice to support their particular learning style and abilities. Content creators' needs are much more complex. They need more than just their content to be findable. To increase user adoption, they need to target specific faculty or courses. They want assurance that their content is not being misused. With sensitive content, they might want to know in what context it is being used. They might want to know how the content has been modified. This information will help them ascertain the content's impact factor and provide invaluable feedback for effective content evolution. They need to be able to remix content to adapt it to specific course, even given a package of mixed licensed content. Ultimately, they should own the usage data about their content, even if the content is open or free. Institutions want continuous content integration as content evolves at scale. Corda blockchain is a different type of blockchain, much different than Bitcoin. It is important to understand these differences as it has tremendous business solution feasibility. There's no mining in Corda or consensus voting. You may wonder if Corda is a blockchain after all. Corda is an open source, private permission, multi-ledger blockchain. This means that participants need to be invited to the network. Their identity is known and tied to a legal entity in the real world. The multi-ledger part of Corda indicates that each participant holds only a subset of the transactions, specifically only transactions they participated in and all the dependent transactions. The network contains two special participants. The first one is the business network operator, and the other one is the notary. The business network operator manages the private network, including management of identity for the participating nodes and their security certificates. The notary prevents double spends on the network. No need for mining or consensus voting. Thus, consensus on Corda is fast. As a side note, Bank of Canada is running a project called Jasper. Project Jasper is investigating the use of distributed ledger technology to support international bank settlements. Corda blockchain and similar flavor blockchains like Quorum, which is based on Ethereum, have been favored, mainly due to their ability to provide transaction finality. Each transaction in Corda is verified by the notary. The notary ensures that no double spends occur. For example, let's say that the pink node is me and you are the teal colored node. The notary is separate participant. The transactions are denoted by the navy rectangles. The security certificate signatures for the transactions are denoted by the colored little squares on top of the transaction. Let's say I propose a transaction and sign it with my security certificate. This transaction comes to you and you need to review the transaction's term, that is, its smart contract. If it looks good to you and you want to go ahead with this transaction, you sign the transaction with your security certificate, then you send it to the notary. The notary will validate against its data records to confirm that no double spend is occurring. If that's the case, the notary saves the hashed transactions information. Then the notary signs the transaction denoted by the white square. At this point, the transaction is official and undisputed finality has been reached. Finality of transactions means that the legality of the transaction is reached and cannot be reverted. It is therefore a legal obligation of the parties to settle this transaction in the real world. In Corda, three things need to take place to ensure the legality of a transaction. First, each party needs to validate the smart contract on their node. Second, the notary needs to attest that no double spend is taking place by ensuring uniqueness of the transaction inputs. Third, all parties, including the notary, need to provide signatures and attest that the transaction is valid. To understand how the notary prevents the double spends, we need to understand the anatomy of a transaction. A transaction is simply a set of input states and a set of output states. Each state has unique identification, regardless what the state represents. The example shown indicates that I owe you $100 and I am proposing to give you back $25 of this IOU. This transaction can be described by two input states and two corresponding output states. Notice that each state has its own ID, denoted by the color fingerprint. This allows the notary to track what states have already been used and not allowing to use the same state. In this example, I show you how the state is changed into a new state. But the example does not show you how the original IOU state is created or how the $25 cash state was created. The original states are created using an issuing transaction. Issuing transactions are simply transactions that do not have input states. Therefore, they do not need a notary signature. The legal obligation for these transactions rests with the node that made the issuance on its ledger. Thus, you cannot legally issue something onto your ledger if you don't possess it in the real world. Your node will ensure that any new state that you issue has a unique ID. The notary will combine the state ID and the node ID. This guarantees the uniqueness of each state in the entire network. The uniqueness of the state ID is what the notary uses to prevent double spends. When I propose a transaction to pay off the $25 of my $100 IOU that you have lent me, you need to validate that my proposal makes sense and it's a fair business transaction. You do this by validating the business logic. Corda is built on Java. All the smart contracts that validate business logic are built using Java. The smart contract is part of the transaction. My node and your node have to be consistent in validating the smart contracts. Smart contracts are validated using hashed bytecode. For this reason, it's important that compiled contract code by Java Virtual Machine is deterministic. However, regular Java Virtual Machine is not deterministic due to some non-deterministic Java code. As such, a special deterministic version of the Java JVM is used to validate the smart contracts, ensuring my validation is consistent with your validation. Now we know that transactions can only use previously unseen input states. The notary uses this to prevent double spends. A notary checks its database to see if any of the input states already have been used. If not, the notary signs the transaction as valid and at the same time marks the input states of the transaction as historic, preventing future double spends of these input states. Note that the notary not only checks the proposed transaction, but also all the previous transactions that have state dependency. This is what makes Corda a blockchain technology. Notice that there's no mining, no proof of work, no voting consensus. We need a more complex example to demonstrate this process. Suppose that Bank A issues cash to some node called Bob, and another bank B issues a bond to me. Notice that the notary was not involved in verifying these transactions as these were issuing transactions. Now let's say I want to swap this bond with Bob for cash. This transaction needs to be validated, not just by me and Bob, but also by the notary. The notary will check its database to ensure that state cash 1 and state bond 1 have not been used by other transactions. Note that this part is not shown on the diagram. Then the notary will look at the dependent transactions to ensure those are valid as well. The notary will ask me where I got state cash 1. I'll provide the previous transaction to the notary. Bob will provide the transaction that created state bond 1 to the notary. Since both state cash 1 and state bond 1 were created by an issuing transaction, there are no more other dependencies. The notary is satisfied and will provide its signature on the transaction. Notice that state cash 1 and state bond 1 have been marked by the notary as historic. Now let's say that you want to lend me some cash. At some later point in time, I want to repay you. I propose this transaction. The proposed transaction transfers the ownership of state cash 2 from me to you. State cash 2 will be changed to state cash 3, where the only difference is the ownership of the asset it represents. The transaction upholds our business logic, so you want to go ahead with this transaction, but you first want to make sure I did not already spend state cash 2 with somebody else. You send this transaction to the notary for validation. The notary checks that no other transaction used state cash 2 or state IOU 1. Then it needs to trace back both these states to its original issuance. You provide previous transactions that generated state IOU 1 to the notary. The notary does not care about the other states, cash 4 and cash 5. Next, the notary will request a transaction that generates state cash 2. I'll provide that transaction. However, this transaction is not an issuance transaction for the state. The notary will use this transaction to find the previous transaction that generated state cash 1. This transaction is an issuance transaction for the state cash 1. Therefore, no further validation is required. The notary will mark state cash 2 and state IOU 1 as historic states, thus preventing these states from being consumed by any other transactions. Corda is spearheaded by international consortium of financial institutions. Recently, it has found use cases in the supply chain of physical goods. I would like to show you how it can be used in the publishing industry. Electronic content is easily reproducible. You can generate infinite copies. We can create a new type of currency, the zero currency, so that we can exchange the content states with the zero currency states. This provides a tracking system of consuming content and producing content activities. In the provided example, we see that the organization C, denoted by purple color, is a super consumer, and that the individual B, denoted by orange color, is a super producer. Note that the participants on the network do not see each other's data. Thus, each participant owns their own data. Why would you transact something that is free and infinitely reproducible? Let's drill down on the business value a little bit more. We will cover the benefits of these three areas: market creation, market sophistication, and sustainability. The business network provides a marketplace. Having this marketplace generates benefits. First, it provides community strength. Second, it provides motivation. Third, it provides quality data for decision-making. Having a trusted marketplace can elevate the sophistication of the market by supporting market reorganization. Market reorganization will cause true disruption and innovation. As a metaphor, I imagine business dynamics of farming, where there are no infrastructure such as roads. The reach of the farmer is limited. The light green colored farmer will only serve the orange village. The dark green colored farmer will only serve the blue village. Suppose now we invest in roads, connecting the farmers and villages. The dynamics would change. The farmers having further reach can now specialize their farm and become competitive on their key strength. This in turn drives more infrastructure investments. New businesses are set up to distribute the goods, such as warehouses and shops, to increase efficiency. What does this mean in the world of OER content? We look at it from three perspectives. Institutions can be strategic in the OER content they produce. This in turn will drive OER content to be more modular, that addresses the unique needs of students and institutions. The backbone of the marketplace can be used to support administration of high volume adoption of OER by institutions. The distribution transparency provides an increased ability for content creators to manage collaboration by providing them with legal protections and negotiation capabilities. How about sustainability? I'm proposing that to achieve sustainability, we need at least these three aspects: money, diversity, and legal protection. Money simply means people getting paid for their work and be recognized for their work, allowing people to provide their work for free and other work for a fee. Diversity means that organizations of different sizes, including individuals, should be able to have access to the transaction system directly. That's benefiting from the transaction transparency and legal protection, participating in the content distribution actively. The gig economy is growing. The gig economy represents individuals working on small contracts without the benefits of permanent employment. It is critical to represent these individuals in a formal supply chain. Let's look at the characteristics of the decentralized supply chain that support feasibility. It is an integrated ecosystem, it is scalable, it has data ownership, and it has an inclusive ecosystem. Each node in the network can access its own data through RPC, remote procedure call. New applications and existing applications can integrate the data owned by the node. RPC can be used to push or pull the data from the node. An example of pushing data is the process of making new content available on your node. An example of pulling data is the process of extracting usage data about content uptake. Perhaps the most important implication is that existing external platforms can integrate to the node, providing the content creators the ability to manage the content on multiple platforms and have a consolidated view. TPS is transactions per second. Depending on how it is measured, Corda node can process 170 up to 1,678 transactions per second. This is due to its quick consensus. From the business perspective, the metadata labels embedded in the transactions can support sophisticated content integration administration tools, allowing the institutions to adopt high volume of content at scale. For example, contracts about content can include version and accessibility labels. These can be used to automatically route the content to interested parties. This routing can be done within the node, that is different departments or faculty, or between other nodes, that is other institutions. Automatic content routing greatly increases the ability of the institution to administer high volume of content. Out of the box, Corda-based supply chain provides privacy and data ownership. That is because the dependent chain of transaction is hashed and encrypted. In the example provided, you see that the blue content owner can only see direct transactions indicated by the blue arrows. However, when the orange content remixer transactions indicated by orange arrows are not seen by the blue content creator. This ensured by the private resolution process conducted by the notary. Remember that the notary's job is to prevent double spends. Each node in the network owns its own data. When participants own their data, they can strategically choose to share parts of the data with specific participants. However, many interesting machine learning solutions will require aggregating data from across the nodes. Recent advancements in hardware-enabled confidential computing, such as the Intel SGX, provides business solution for cases where users own their data and do not wish to share their data directly. Conclave in Corda provides that extra data security. This solution retains data ownership and privacy simultaneously. One of the really unique and valuable features of Corda-based applications is the ability of these applications to manage identity at a granular level. An institution that has its own node can set up the node in a granular manner such that departments and faculty within the institution can transact with each other or with other nodes. This can power many administration tools. The same functionality can be used to represent individual content creators or small organizations which don't want the cost of running their own node and instead share one node. Representing smaller boutique content creators injects rich and dynamic diversity into the ecosystem at a large scale. Because the supply chain can be so granular, the value is in the network, not in the technology, democratizing content creation. At Open Sale Education, we are building open source supply chain and value-added services. It will comprise of the supply chain for exchanging open and free content for free of charge. This part will be open source. We will add value-added services that sit on top of the supply chain. We will grow the business network of partnerships. We'll promote the vendors to create value-added services. I believe that this distributed infrastructure will support diverse and more equitable content creation ecosystem that has great scalability. I demonstrated that there is economic and social value in formalizing a supply chain for freely available content. I look forward to discussing these ideas and technology with you. You can contact me directly at ivona.sokalska@ryerson.ca. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivona. So once again, I want to thank both speakers, Steve and Ivona, for their great presentations. I did notice that there was a question from Mikhail. I believe that this is for Ivona, so I can read it for them. They asked, are there any guarantees that there won't be a collision vulnerability with bytecodes? They go on to explain, is it guaranteed that each program will have a one-to-one mapping to the compiled bytecode domain?
Yes, so there shouldn't. So the point of validating the smart contract is to just make sure that what I'm seeing, all the parties are transacting together are seeing the same thing. um, that is different than what the notary is trying to do, making sure that each input state is unique. So Corda has developed a special version of the Java virtual machine so that it only uses deterministic code. So technically, when you're writing that smart contract, you're a little bit limited in what Java code you can put in there. And when they know that when that is being removed, that those parts of the code are not, those things are not being used, then you're guaranteed that the byte code for sure is going to be the same as when I compile it.
Excellent. I just want to ask if there were any other questions that we have at this time. Oh, yeah. Please, Dr. Burrow.
Hi, I'm unable to write because I'm awed by the quality of the speakers, so I'll just talk. The question is actually to Steve, since he went first, which is somewhat of an advantage, but now a disadvantage because everyone's forgotten all their questions. So the question is about the clinicians that you've been talking to. So this is a source of data, right? So are you planning on developing a kind of a like, how are you going to report that, like in your thesis, or are you even planning to report it? Because clearly there was some kind of interaction that you're gathering insight into how the mind of doctors work, and I never really asked this question before, so I'm curious.
Well, I think if I answer your question, there's two aspects. First of all, I have approached the ethics Ryerson department, and there's a form that I have to fill out, even to talk to doctors or even to deal with anonymized patient data. You have to follow certain rules and regulations. Now, in terms of evaluating the output, doctors will be involved, and I've lined up doctors because just through my network, doctors will be involved in two things. They'll help develop the schema specific to their specialty, and then they'll have to evaluate through many examples of using our algorithms against the data. Is it pulling back the data that they want to see? And they're going. And I haven't figured out. Great question, Alex. I haven't figured out actually how to rate that yet mathematically, but certainly qualitatively, I'll get a lot of feedback in terms of, yeah, it's hell of a lot better than what I had before, or is it really hasn't helped me at all. But I'll have to work on those qualitative and quantitative evaluation metrics. I haven't done that yet.
I don't want to, one I just wrote a question in there, but I'll treat that as my question part B. So again, it's to Steve. So what are you going to do for something like increasing? Well, I mean, you alluded to it, right? So healthcare is very expensive, and some of it is borne by the patient themselves now, increasingly, because insurance companies, of course, don't want to cover some treatments. So people go to the cheapest provider. Sometimes those cheap providers are in other countries, and they don't give a rat's ass about the Canadian Medical Association's strictures that nobody knows how to practice medicine except for Canadian doctors. So increasingly, like we deal with a company right now. Called I forget what it's called actually, but it's in Pakistan. So basically, their Pakistani doctors are providing information. Now, wouldn't it be convenient if Pakistani doctors would have access to Canadian health records that are controlled by Canadian patients? Now, is that something that would be envisioned by your scheme?
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. The whole point of a patient-centric world model on their health, where you could live in Canada, have a vacation place in Florida. You're ill in either location. The clinician should have access to your total record to give you the best treatment possible. That's a long-term vision. I'd be happy if we could even get consolidation of records and access just in Ontario. So. One step at a time. And so my goal is to try to influence the way we do things here in Ontario and then Canada. And if we can reach out beyond Canada to get records from other locations, that would be fantastic. But I think we're looking out a decade perhaps for that to be available. But it's a great question.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm just going to invite anyone, if they want to ask any questions, please do so right now. Okay. Once again, I want to thank both speakers, Iwana and Steve, for their presentations on blockchain. I definitely learned something. I hope everyone else did still too. With this, we are going to conclude this speaker series. Once again, I want to thank everybody that was a part of this, including the IEEE Toronto Women in Engineering Group, the Instrument Measurements Robotics Automation Group, as well as IEEE Toronto. And once again, to the speakers themselves. But with this, I will say thank you, goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.